Good evening and aloha everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you had an excellent week. It's great to have you join us for Tuning Up with Iggy and Dave. Dave is, of course, our executive director. As I said before, it's only Tuesday night, but how many hours have you spent at work already yesterday and today?
You know, it's been a light start of the week. I'll tell you, I maybe escaped for a round of golf in the past 48 hours to celebrate all of the work that we've been doing at the Symphony. We're on the cusp of some big announcements for the next couple of months here. So if I look like I have a little bit of a sunburn, it's the first time I've been in the sun since I've lived here. So,
which reminds me, by the way, last week, I'm sorry I couldn't.
Yeah, we'll have to
tonight.
talk about that.
But my wife, Chris, she saw the show and she really enjoyed it from beginning to end. So you guys, you don't need me much. But anyway, what I was going to say is I had mentioned once this segment that we should bring up called To Dave with Aloha. So we invite all our viewers to provide your suggestions to Dave, because as he just mentioned, you don't get to go out much. You're in the office 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and it's only been 1 year. And so things from Hawaii that you would encourage Dave to try out.
Do you have something for me, Iggy?
Yeah, there's some hikes on the Lanikai side of the islands.
Okay.
My wife's extended family live around there, and they took us. It's called the Pillbox. I'm sure everyone knows that, but it's refreshing. You know, it's already 7:32, and we haven't introduced our special guest for tonight. I'm so sorry. We have had on this show musicians from the orchestra. We have had soloists, guest artists. We have had the CEO of the Hawaii Theater Center, but we haven't had this part of the music business, the artist manager, the artist representative, or the impresario. So we are so happy tonight to welcome Cathy Monseur.
Thank you very much.
And Cathy, we didn't find you in New York where you used to work. You actually live here in Hawaii.
I do.
So it's a pleasure to have you. I know you've followed this show, you've been to the Symphony, and today actually is the first time you got to meet our executive director.
Yes.
What impressions do you have from Dave?
I think everybody's really lucky to have you and Dave. That's what I think. I think it's a little bit of it's got that little, excitement about it that's kind of fun and a little off and out of the box, as we were talking, which I think is great and exactly what we need right now. It's not called the creative arts for nothing, right?
Absolutely. And we especially thank you because I understand you had a little bit of a nerve issue.
Oh, my poor pinch.
We won't go too much into details.
Just don't let me swivel my head too fast one way or another. And I'll probably forget it, but that's okay.
Oh, that's great. Dave, if people have questions?
Yes. Would you like me to give the number this evening? If you'd like to text questions to us tonight, you may text the number below on your screen right here. And we will get those and answer them. You can text them for Iggy, for any of us up here this evening. Yes. So I have to ask a question. Are you here hiding in Hawaii?
I never should have said that. I actually not hiding, but I did come to sort of reconfigure, if you will, what I was doing a little bit.
Well, as Iggy mentioned, we think of artist managers and we think of New York.
Right.
So we're a long way from New York.
Well, I worked in New York for 20 years.
Yeah.
So I did spend the time. In New York.
Yeah.
And then I decided I needed a break, and it turned into a much longer break than anticipated. But I came out here, and I was really just on a trip to visit, and I fell in love with the islands, and I went to Hilo, and I ended up going to Hilo and going to Hilo and getting a certificate in Pacific Island Studies. And I never went back to New York. I mean, I went back and forth to see family, obviously, but I never went back to work or to stay in the city.
So the question that I like to pose is take us back to the beginning, and we let you decide what the beginning is, how far back you'd like to go.
The beginning of...
The Book of Genesis or the Book of Cathy Monseur?
Me starting out in music. How did I get into the business, or what happened once I got into the business? Where do we want to go here?
Yes. That's what it is. Yes.
Well, I grew up in Connecticut, and I was very lucky with my parents and with the town in which I grew up, because my dad was not particularly musical, but he had an uncle and aunt who were a violinist and a singer-harpist. So I heard a lot from Uncle John and Aunt Mary, who also liked to read the bumps on your head. She was Italian. She was very interesting. My mother's family was quite musical, although they were not professional. Most of them were not professional musicians. My mother played a little piano. She had a nice alto voice. My grandmother had wanted to be an opera singer, and that didn't work out for her, but she sang always in choirs, and my grandfather had a beautiful high lyric tenor, as did my great-grandfather. So they sang in church all the time, and we sang all the time. If there was nothing to do, we were in the car, we were traveling, we were singing. My mother's brother, however, who was the apple of my eye, was a jazz drummer. And he started drumming on my high chair. You wanted to go back to the beginning?
Please.
This is it.
This is getting exciting.
I had flams and paradiddles on my high chair before probably I could speak much. And when I was old enough, he started taking me, when I was old enough, like 10, he started taking me to jazz clubs. And I couldn't sit out in the, where the alcohol was being served, so I would be in the kitchen with the musicians. So it all started kind of, right away. And it was great. My path was never jazz. I was not good at it. I tried once, it was a terrible failure. But I loved classical music. And my parents encouraged me without pushing too hard. We moved. Actually, we'd been in New Jersey then. I was born in New Jersey. We moved to Connecticut when I was 4 and lucked into a school system that put a lot behind the arts, a lot of money behind the arts, a lot of effort behind the arts. And there were 2 men, and I like to talk about them because I never go anywhere. When I was working and I was speaking, I never got onto the dais without feeling like these 2 men were somehow hovering at my side. And that was the junior high school band director and our high school band director. They worked together. The junior high school band director was a classical guitarist. The band director had been a trumpet player in Vegas, and they knew one another. I think they both went to the Hart School, but I'm not entirely sure. But they came into the system apparently together. And in 5th grade, they started us on instruments, and the high school teacher came and gave us a lesson once a week. We had a little ear test, and you could get a free instrument from the school, and I got a flute. And then after 6th grade, they began encouraging us to start studying at the Hart School. It was before it was incorporated into the University of Hartford, so it was still the Hart School, not the Hart College of Music. And so we started taking lessons on Saturdays, and there were lots of us. I mean, it was a smallish school, maybe 1,000 students altogether. At least 10 of us were going into Hartford on Saturdays. My dad gave up every Saturday and drove me independently because I ended up with a whole day's program. I had a voice lesson or a flute lesson, and then one year I had theory, and one year I had children's opera theater, and then we had Greater Hartford Youth Band. It was there were no strings, either in the town or in the Greater Hartford Youth Band. So it was a symphonic wind ensemble, they called it. And my high school teacher happened to be the conductor of it. But it was great. The other kids were carpooling, they were just coming in for that. And so we had a lot of encouragement. They really put a great program together. We practiced like mad. I was listening to Mr. Seta and listening to what he was saying, and I was wondering if he understood how much of a difference someone like him can make over the lifetime of the students. Because with if you get the support of your parents and the town gets behind you, and you're lucky enough to get someone like Mr. Seta or like Sam Goldfarb and Lindsay Wallace, for me, you can end up in the music business. If you decide not to become a performing artist for whatever reason, many other avenues open for you. And I think it's great. I love listening to him talk about it. It took me back a little bit, you know. So that's what happened. So for the next 6 years, I spent every Saturday pretty much at the Hart School. The band, our symphonic wind ensemble, went to Pittsburgh to the Mideast All-Star Festival. We played at the World's Fair in New York, and we went to the Music Educators National Conference in Boston. So we were on the road, and it was just what Mr. Seta said. They were selling brownies, and I don't think we were washing cars, but you know, people were raising money, and we needed new uniforms, and it was really great.
And you were playing the flute.
And I was playing the flute. Yes, I was a flutist and a singer. I liked singing better than I liked playing the flute, but I was better at playing the flute than I was at singing for some odd reason. But I really did love it. I loved music. I still love music. And if I ever do try to hide out, it doesn't work very well because artists that I know and love appear, and you know, I have to go.
They're everywhere.
Yes.
So being a young musician, when did you realize that there was a career in music that wasn't necessarily with an instrument in your hand?
Oh, that wasn't until I was 20, maybe, because I did go on to major in music. I went first to Duquesne University for 2 years to study with the first flutist of the Pittsburgh Symphony. And then I went for 1 year only to the École Nationale Supérieure de Musique de Paris, which I've heard you say on here a number of times. But I only went for a year.
Only 1 year, but Cathy speaks fluent French. Anyway, let's not talk about French too much because people are going to complain. But let's go back to you. Flute.
So then I left. So I came back from Paris, and I went back to Duquesne. But I was always, you know, 1 year I was a voice major, and 1 year I was a flute major, and 1 year I was a voice major, and I wasn't making up my mind, really. And so at some point I just stopped, and I moved to Boston, and I have to mention French one more time, and I moved to Boston, and I thought I have to get a degree. I've been at this now for a long time. So I got my degree in French language and literature from Boston University. And then I realized I needed to do something. By then I had realized I was not going to go on stage. My nerves were not steady enough to be a solo performer. And I took a job at a radio station, at a rock and roll radio station, writing just like a receptionist job, writing public service announcements. And it was fun, you know. They were a lot of fun. And I stayed there not too long, and then I wrote for small pieces for a couple of magazines. I did concert listings and concert previews, and I just sort of, you know, didn't make much money and just sort of ferreted my way through the business, through those parts of the business. But while I was doing it, I was learning, you know, so I learned about that you need public service announcements. I learned, you know, how to make listings. I learned how to do all that stuff.
Organization.
Yeah.
And so when did you find that door that led you to becoming an artist representative?
Well, I decided to move to New York. I decided I wanted to be in the business, and I moved to New York City without a job. And I looked for a job as if it were a job. And the first job that presented itself to me that looked really interesting was at this artist management agency. And again,
did you know people to get you in, or you just saw an announcement?
I only knew 1 or 2 people to talk to in New York City, because when I had done a few interviews for the magazine, for the smaller magazines in Boston, and so I met a couple of publicists.
Okay.
So you know, I talked to them, but I really just worked it like it was a job. I got my Musical America, which is a great big fat book, a listing of all the agencies and all the orchestras and all the chamber music societies and almost everything you can think of. And I marked out neighborhoods. And I marked out neighborhoods in the morning. I got dressed up every morning as if I were going to work, and I did it the old-fashioned way. There was no internet. You know, so you just went door to door, and I took these, you know, these resumes, and I banged on doors and said, "Are you looking for anybody?" And when I got to the Hilliard office, the fellow, it was, actually I remember it was pouring down rain. And I said, I was getting a little bedraggled. And I thought, oh God, maybe I shouldn't go to another one. You know, I thought, well, I'm right in front of the building.
Sorry, you said Hilliard, but it's actually called Kazuko?
Kazuko Hilliard International.
Which
was
is
the name
a
of
booking agency?
It was. It's not, it doesn't exist any longer.
And it's named after?
Kazuko Hilliard was the woman who owned the agency and started the agency.
And
she's Japanese living in the United States. So anyway, I walked in and I said, and this fellow said to me, and I'm usually fairly cheerful about things, and this nice man said to me, "What can we do for you? Can we help you?" And I said, "Oh, probably not." And I threw all my stuff down on the first desk, and he said, "Oh, poor thing, what do you need?" And I said, "I need a job." And he said, "Congratulations, I just quit." And that was my first job in New York City, and I took his job. And so it was sort of receptionist and assistant to 3 different managers, including Mrs. Hilliard, who was the owner of the agency. And it was crazy, and I loved it. But yeah, but that's
But
the
Mrs.
beginning.
Hilliard is affiliated to the Juilliard String Quartet?
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore,
No.
but she was.
No,
No, she
No,
never. She never was. Okay, I got my
That's okay.
wires right.
that's all right.
But
She'd had an agency for quite a while, and she'd worked with a lot of, but she, at the time when I got there, the Tokyo String Quartet was on the list. There were a number of really fine quartets. The Composer's String Quartet was there, the American String Quartet was there, Imuzuchi was, we were touring Imuzuchi from Italy, so there was quite a lot of, you know, there were a lot of concerts, and yeah, that's how I got started.
and then you spent quite a bit of time after the Hilliard agency to. Did you go straight from Hilliard to YCA?
I did.
Young Concert Artists.
I did. I stayed 5 years with Mrs. Hilliard, and I went from that entry-level job to being a concert coordinator. And she had about, I guess the office did about 3,000 concerts a year. So I was doing programs, publicity, and travel for not for the singers, but everything else. So I was writing the bios, and you know, like I said, there were no computers in those days. If you needed a new flyer, you hired an artist, and you went and you picked the typeface, and you looked at the colors, and you did, you know, was all that stuff. And the transportation and the programs.
So sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry,
No. But so YCA, Young Concert Artists,
yes.
is related to the trivia question that we have, Dave.
We do, yes. Young Concert Artists. Well, for those who don't know what this is, can you describe YCA? You know, what's the elevator pitch on YCA?
Young Concert Artists is a nonprofit management agency that discovers and develops the careers of great young classical musicians. It holds auditions every year. It's a bit like a competition. It is a competition, except that the artists are not competing against one another. They compete against a standard of excellence. So there can be any number of winners. You can have no winners. You can have 3 oboe players. Theoretically, you could have 2 pianists and a singer. Depends on who meets that standard of excellence and is ready to begin a fully professional career. At least that's what was going on when I was there,
Yes.
which is a very long time ago. And I know things change, but I'm sure that the mission is they are still
Yes.
discovering and developing the careers of great young classical artists.
Aspiring soloist.
Yeah.
Um,
What age would you hear them?
Well, there's technically no age limit, but it's young concert artists. The idea is that you're trying to begin the careers. Anyone who's really had too many performances and already done too much is then it makes more sense to get to a commercial agency. That's really
Commercial
more,
agency
more,
like-
more appropriate.
like Columbia
like
Artists?
what Columbia Artists was, or you know, ICM, or one of those. IMG, I guess, is still there.
And it's an organization that's been around for quite a while.
This is the 60th anniversary.
60th anniversary. So
Yeah,
a
this
lot
is
of
the
artists
60th anniversary.
have come through this wonderful program to launch their careers,
Yeah.
which takes us to our trivia question this evening. We have had a number of soloists perform with the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra, whether you know it or not, you will know it this evening, that came through the YCA program. So the quiz question tonight is name any one YCA Artist that has performed with the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. And you'll be getting a bottle of wine, a Turnbull wine this evening from our friends at Hosser Wine just down the street here in Chinatown. The winner must be on the island of Oahu and over the age of 21.
It's a Turnbull Wine Cellars Cabernet Sauvignon 2018. Now, if you're familiar with this show, very often our guest reveals kind of the answer of our trivia question because inevitably it's all intertwined. So you should pay attention.
Can I? Is
yes,
this the wine that they
This
get?
is it.
I have to say, it smells divine.
Nothing but the best here on Tuesday.
Yes,
evenings.
the aroma is coming right at me. It's fabulous.
It's funny because we had so many guests, but surprisingly, a lot of our guests don't drink at all. So many of them have kind of politely declined our servings, but we're happy that you will be. You and I probably will have to wait until the end of the show.
Yes, I'm going to wait
Dave
until the end
is
of
on
the show.
your, how many?
I just want to
many
make sure
glasses
that
is
it's good before the quiz question comes out. We don't want to be giving away bad wine or anything.
So you you went over your training as a flute player.
Yeah.
We can see how passionate you're about education, and so by joining YCA, you kind of had the best of both worlds of not just working with artists who are already established, but you help them into growing to their soloist career.
Well, the interesting thing is that I had heard about young concert artists when I was still living in Boston. And I was kind of fascinated by it. And I had thought that one of the things that I would always like to do would be to help work with young artists, because I had stopped performing at a particular, in my 20s. It's kind of a tender age. It's a time when you begin to make these decisions. Do I really want to keep doing this? Can I keep doing this? And you can get sidetracked very easily. And I thought that, it's an interesting, it's a crucial time, but it's an interesting time in someone's. And it's hard to get a career started. So I had heard about young concert artists. In fact, I had been in New York City once for one debut performance, and it turned out that it was it was the debut performance of Carter Bray, the cellist Carter Bray. It was his YCA debut. Because when you win a young concert artist in those days, you got a New York City recital debut and a Washington, D.C. recital debut, and I happened to be at Carter's in New York. So I heard that I got a call. I had met the other artist manager at YCA at varying industry conferences around the country. And I knew that Carter was there. Carter Bray was also in a trio at Kazuko Hilliard International at that time. And so I was working with that trio in terms of the coordination, not the management. And they called me and asked if I was interested, and I said, you bet. And while I was very sad to leave the artists at the Hilliard office, because I get quite attached to them, I have to say, I was delighted to have a chance to go to Young Concert Artists. And so I went right there from the Hilliard office.
You mentioned Carter Bray. I actually, he performed when I was working in Colorado as a soloist. And I know you're afraid of saying the name of an artist that's been a performer with the Hawaii Symphony, but really that's okay. What was the difference? So when you were with Hilliard, you worked on with Imuzichi and Tokyo String Quartet.
Right.
They were already established.
Yes.
Did you have to pamper, in a way, those artists coming out of YCA, because maybe some of them they just want to play with New York Phil the minute they get hired by YCA, or do you have to slow them down? Do you have to kind of be careful on so they don't get burnout quickly?
Well, when I got to YCA, Carter had just left the roster, so I was not working with him specifically at Young Concert Artists. The thing is that all the artists that win YCA win, everybody's an individual, so they're all at slightly different stages, and you need to sort of speak to those stages of development, because what you really don't want to do is put an artist in a situation where it just doesn't work. I mean, that's not a really good idea. You know, the idea is for everybody to have a good experience. And so some of the artists had more performing experience when they won the auditions than others. And so the first thing you do is find out what that is. You sort of sit down and figure that out and have a good chat and find out what the possibilities are and where they are. And then they get a bio and they get a photo shoot and all those things get put together. And then you slowly begin to figure out what is a good path, you know. And I never had anybody that went straight to the New York Philharmonic. I mean, that's not, the thing is that generally what you're doing is you're working out repertoire in the beginning. That's a big part of it. Not only are you putting the profile together with the publicity materials and but you're giving career guidance, and part of that is working with repertoire and saying, okay, you know, you've played this and you've played that, we can start out with this. Now, you know, what are you working on? What do you want to do? And I think one of the things was not to put an artist in front of an orchestra. It's something that they were not fully prepared to do. You really tried hard not to do that. And we had lots of times where we had people try things out with piano accompaniment. If it was a concerto, you try it out. You know, there were different places around town in people's living rooms, you know, board members' living rooms, and you get a bunch of people together and you do a run through. You can do that. Anybody can do that. You can do that with chamber music. You can do it with recitals. You know, and then you work your way.
That's wonderful.
Up.
I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned repertoire, because you could have this audition, but then you hire them, but you don't necessarily know that if they worked on the repertoire that they auditioned for, if that's the only thing they worked on for years and years, or if they have actually a body of repertoire. Was there any way for you to know that, oh yes, we're going to select that person because we know that they're...
Jury has to make a unanimous decision on the talent, on the audition. And I was not on the semifinal or the final.
But you were in the preliminary
I was in the
rounds.
preliminary rounds. So we saw what they submitted. You know, there were categories, and then they would submit like you would for a competition, right? And not all of the auditions were live either in the beginning, because you have this enormous number of people who applied, and so you go through, and then the next get the jury, the other jury, and so. In any event, yeah, well, you don't really know everything. You talk it through. You talk it through.
So, Dave, I don't know if we have any answer right now, but
we've got a few answers, yeah. So we can feel free to talk about any artist at this
It's
point.
been a long time.
Yeah,
So,
that's
I left YCA 25 years ago, so, you know, things change over time.
And it's been a while.
And it's been a while. I don't, remember
for
exactly
all
how
of us.
everything worked.
But I do remember one very impressive performance we had with the Hawaii Symphony. It might have been back with the Honolulu Symphony. Was I'm sorry, I'm talking about French or France again, but Jean-Yves Thibaudet,
Yes.
famous French pianist, soloed here. I think he played the Beethoven Concerto, I think. Anyway, you know Jean-Yves because
Because he was a young concert artist. But he had just left when I was there, but he was actually the first person after Carter, he was the first artist that I met, because it happened to be I started on the 25th anniversary, and a couple of days before I started was the gala. And so I thought, well, they said, would you like to come? And I said, well, yeah, I can meet some of the artists there. So the first person that stuck his hand out said, hi, I'm Jean-Yves Thibaudet. It was really lovely.
Did you find him to be as colorful as he's known to be?
Oh, he's wonderful. He's wonderful, Red Sox and all. I don't know if he still wears them, but he did.
I remember because I think my wife said, oh yeah, it was wonderful. During the week, I said, you think he could play a little Bill Evans? I think because he does a lot of jazz arrangement. So at one of the rehearsals, I just straight asked Jean-Yves, you think you could do a little bit of Bill Evans for us? And so he didn't say, he said, yeah, peut-être, yeah, maybe, je ne sais pas. And then he did it. So, to ask a soloist to do an encore that sometimes, they don't like it when you make a request, but It was a very beautiful
nice.
weekend. Yes.
Yeah, that is a bold request.
It is.
The concertmaster is suggesting your encore piece. Careful violinists who come next year. So
Yeah.
that is just one of many huge artists that came through YCA throughout the history. I mean, when you go back, I mean, perhaps giving away some of the names that are on our list, I mean, who were these artists that came through YCA?
Well, in the early days, in the beginning, was the Tokyo String Quartet and Murray Pariah and Emmanuel Axe and Richard Good and Paula Robeson and Ruth Laredo and Pinchas Zuckerman. And then there was the Christopher O'Reilly, Carter Braid, Dawn Upshaw, wonderful singer Dawn Upshaw, Jean-Yves Thibaudet. Then there was sort of the group. I mean, there are lots of other groups, and I'm not mentioning everybody. Anybody I leave out, forgive me, but you know, there's been way too many. I'm just cherry picking a little bit here. And then my group came along, and some of them are now they're getting quite well known. But it's, as I said, it's been a long time since I worked with them. But the violinist Chi-Yun, who has been here a number of times.
And that is actually our winner, Helen, this evening, selected Chi-Yun. So we have our winner, so
Yes,
we can carry on.
someone I worked with, who I adored
Yes.
working with.
Yes.
The wonderful pianist Eduardo Salim, who has been here as well. Cellist Alban Gerhard and the French pianist Jean-Yves Lambavouze are both getting quite well known now, from what I understand, and they're both wonderful.
You had your
The St. Lawrence String Quartet, the Borromeo String Quartet. You know,
Anna
there's
Kiko Myers.
Anna Kiko Myers was a young concert artist.
Scott Yu.
Scott St. John. I bumped into. It was very funny. I was grocery shopping one day, just sort of, you know, hanging around doing my grocery shopping, and I picked up a copy of Midweek or something. And when they were still doing the listings, when we were able to go out and go to events and see things, and I noticed that there was a piano competition taking place at the convention center, and I thought, oh, that's sort of interesting.
It's Lisa.
And I looked at the jurors, and I thought, oh my God, it's Ori Shahor. And Ori was a pianist on the YCA list. So I quit, you know, dumped my groceries, and I just went over there. I sat, and I hadn't seen him for 20 years. It was really funny because I kept going, is that really Ori? I wonder if that's, because, you know, they grow up, right? And it was really fun. It was kind of like old home week, even after all those years.
You mentioned it. It's like being in a family.
It's like being in a family. It has an alumni organization, an alumni association, and once you're part of it in any way, I mean, you really feel nurtured, and you really feel and I mean, it exists for the good of the artist. Really, is what it does.
Which is I would say perhaps is a little bit different than commercial management.
Well, commercial management's a business.
Yes.
And they have to make money. And it functions more like a business. I mean, at YCA, if an artist walks into the office, everything used to stop. You know, it was like, oh, guess who's here?
Yeah.
You know, and we could do that. With a commercial agency, it really has a very different feel. It's also wonderful. I loved it. I was in 3 different commercial agencies, actually, and I adored it because I love music and I love working with musicians. Although I did find that the farther along I got, the less contact I actually had with the artists sometimes, because it was more about the business part. You had managers, and then you had bookers.
Right.
Right. And when I was at Columbia Artists, I was booking. I managed several artists through the booking department, because I had been managing for a long time, for 10 years at that point. But in general, I was booking concerts. So it was a lot of long hours, which we chatted about.
But booking, is that Rostropovich that you booked?
I did, but I only met him once.
Frederica von Stade, Merlin Horn, Marvin Hamlich.
Yeah, I did. I booked.
Those are the people you booked.
Concerts for them, but I didn't always get to meet them.
It wasn't as personable of a relationship.
Well, for me, no, but because they had managers. I was not the manager. At YCA, you're the manager, and you're booking the concerts.
You had all the numbers, which none of them you will tell us.
Right.
You won't tell us how much Rostropovich was asking for.
Absolutely can't tell you that. No, I cannot.
Not
I can't tell you
really? No.
personal details of their
Okay.
lives. I can't tell you, and besides, I wouldn't know. Well, Mr. Rostropovich has passed on.
R.I.P.
But yes, absolutely. But I couldn't talk. Even if I knew what they were today, I wouldn't be able to tell you. So, or their private
So,
details.
sorry, I kind of sidetracked a little bit. But back to
That was a little
YCA.
unfair.
So you have the artists
Can I do
for
that?
YCA,
You can.
and you kind of sit down at some point, right? So you heard them play wonderfully at the auditions.
Where are we
And
back
so-
at YCA?
Yeah, we're back at
You've
YCA.
regressed a little here.
Yes,
Okay.
I always do that. But
Excuse me.
and so you're about to sort of find the best path for their career, and so you give them opportunities
Well, you
to
book.
perform.
you-
What about off the stage? Is there a behavior that you kind of train them to be like? Answers that they shouldn't or should say? Is it a personality, an aura that you
Oh,
kind
I
of
think you.
influence?
I think you want to highlight the personality of each individual artist. I mean, that's part of their individual voice, at least for me.
So like
So
no
now
one,
I'm just going to talk for me.
no one that you saw ever just like practice 12 hours in that practice room and have no social skills.
Well, social skills are a really important thing to have. And in fact, one of the great things that happened at Young Concert Artists was that they very often booked the artists into residency activities. And so the residency activities could be anything from going to a local radio station to doing a clinic in a high school to going to a university to working with a student orchestra somewhere. Could be a meet and greet. But there were a lot of residency activities, and we found first of all that young people speak very well to young people, because if you send a young person into a school, into a junior high school or a high school or an elementary school, they're likely to ask more naive questions, more open questions than they are of someone who maybe intimidates them in a way. There tends to be an exchange. There were some very touching stories of things that happened while the artists were, communicating with other young artists. You also find that it's very good for the artists to get used to speaking about what they do. And the other thing is sometimes they just are learning English because we're touring them in the United States, largely, not always, but I did a number of European things for some of the artists and a little in Mexico as well. But sometimes they're just learning English, and you while they're doing that, you try to find, if they're doing residencies, you try to find somewhere that they can fit in. And so once I even had a pianist who spoke not too much English, and I found that there was a Russian class at the local university, and so he went into the Russian class and he talked to them about what it was like to, be an artist in Russia, which was kind of interesting for everybody. Yeah. So.
How much of that has changed? Not necessarily in the last 20 years, but even in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think I had this perception of a young Zuckerman, for example. Mm-hmm. He comes on the scene and he plays with some pretty major orchestras pretty young in his career. How much of that development was happening at artists at that point versus in the 90s when you were with YCA, where there was so much more emphasis on the being a very diverse individual that could play the instrument and could connect with the community. And, I think that that's something that I see continuing to develop as we go here.
I can't really speak to the earlier artists because I wasn't there, so I really don't know. But he's pretty personable, I mean, as I said, everybody has an individual voice on the instrument as well as in the the personality shining through, and so I don't really know how much that's changed over time. I think social skills, if we go back to social skills can be important. You can manage without it, but it helps.
But
it helps. I mean, sooner or later you're going to be confronted with someone meeting you when you get off an airplane, or meeting you backstage, or you're going to be confronted with a room full of people who want to congratulate you and say nice things, and you want to tell them how appreciative you are that you've been invited and that you're there.
Absolutely.
So without putting words in people's mouths, you just try to let their personality shine. I don't know. I'm talking about, I'm talking about myself now.
But I
mean,
know
I can't speak for the whole of any organization whatsoever. But for me, that's important. You know?
It's super important. And one of my teachers, when I was in college, said that I stayed with him in like 3-4 years. And when I left after 4 years, he said, "You're fine now, but when you first came to me, you were like a caveman." So,
have you said that to any of your artists?
Quote unquote.
You can't.
So, and also maybe there's a cultural thing. I think
well,
maybe
that's
in America,
very true. That's a good point.
You know, thank you. You know, it's very natural and it's required. Whereas maybe even some part of Europe, and if someone gives you a compliment, if you go like thank you, they don't like it. I think you have to be more humble. I don't know if you've experienced.
Well, there are lots of things. There are lots of those off the stage things to deal with. Sometimes it can just be figuring out what to wear for a performance, getting used to, being comfortable on stage and do what you want and still, be able to manipulate the instrument properly and still, look fine. How many rounds of applause do you wait before you do an encore? Nobody's going to give you a specific number of rounds of applause to wait, but, there is, coming out, taking a bow, just general stage presence, practice taking a bow on the stage.
Are sopranos told to wait, to take longer to get to their spot? Is that something?
Are what?
Sopranos.
To get to what spot?
With their solo spot. That's something that I've always noticed, is that when you have a soprano soloist, they enjoy the applause.
Oh.
As opposed to, a violist. I'm going to run out there real quick because they might stop clapping before I get there.
Well, I don't know. I did not work in the opera world. That's a different world. And I know that's where you're from, partly at least. Yes. So I didn't work in the opera world, but I suspect that may have something to do with it because there is the, recital is a little bit different. I was dealing with mostly recitals and chamber music, some orchestra concerts, also orchestra at YCA, quite a lot of orchestras. And at CAMI, I was actually at Columbia Artists. I was really there to book soloists with orchestra. Yeah. That was my mandate. So I didn't deal with opera very much. Yeah. Although I did do some orchestra performances for Marilyn Horne and Frederica von Stade and Susan Graham and a few people like that at the time from Columbia. But yeah, that could well be. I think the opera training maybe has something to do with that. That's my guess.
Perhaps. The question that I can't believe no one asked, and this is going to just show the other side of me is, is there a Jerry Maguire moment for the artist manager? Did you ever have one of those where you're just yelling, "Show me the money"?
Show me the money.
Yeah.
Not with a presenter.
Okay.
Not with a presenter. I would never say that to a presenter.
I feel like a few have said it to me recently.
Oh, so. I would never say that to a presenter. The presenter is my friend. I've had two kinds of clients. I had the artist clients, but also the presenters are my clients. And I have wonderful friends to this day, actually, that I met at conferences, that I worked with over the years. Some people that I worked with that I met when I was working for Hilliard that I was still working with when I left Columbia Artists all those years later, and I respect them tremendously, and I would never bang my fist and go show me the money. However, in the background, sometimes you do hear something like that.
Yes. Well,
commercial agencies do have to make money. The overhead is big, and they're not. And the artists, let's face it, the artists need to eat. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's important. I think it's important work.
Well, and it's so much about relationship. It's just like fundraising.
Is it still? I'm going to ask you that question. Is it still, because when electronics had not entered too much into it when I left, we were doing emails and we were starting to do electronic press kits. But before that, everything was either on the telephone or it was in person at a conference. And there were and I did a lot of conferences, and I loved them because I got to meet my presenters. They were, And that was, for me, that not everybody likes those, but I love them.
Yeah.
So I need to ask you,
I wish it was more relationship
Yeah.
building at this point. You know, I think that, you know, when you look back at the last year, especially everything we've gone through, and you know, Cami is a good example. Cami no longer
That's true,
exists.
exactly.
You know, because of the circumstances that we've been faced with in the industry, a management company that is no longer around, and you know, a lot of smaller companies have popped up that are representing a lot of those artists, and you know, for me, we're dealing with those people on a much more individual basis now. So I think we're seeing this return to, you know, a little bit more one-on-one relationship
Right.
building, which I think is great for the industry. Because, you know what, for someone in New York to tell us what we need here in Hawaii is very difficult through email. But having a conversation about programming and artists that we're looking for, I think it's just, you have to have that relationship.
I wouldn't honestly know how to go back and not have that and not do it that way. I wouldn't know how. And I don't think I'd be comfortable. First of all, I'm terrible when it comes to computer things. I'm just awful. And I'm going to have to get with the program a little bit. But it was so much about the relationships. You know, you may start talking about one artist and it doesn't work,
Yeah.
and then you say, well, you know, do you need anything else? Is there any other way? Well, we're thinking about this. Our music director's thinking about this possibility, but we're not quite sure. And I could say, oh, but guess who I have coming from Germany or England or just at that time, and maybe we can work something
Yeah.
out, you know, or you put a project together with somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, and those things come while you're sort of brainstorming
Yeah.
on the phone. And yeah, I guess you can do it this way, but it's not as convincing.
Yeah.
And if somebody decides, you know, something else is going on, they can just sort of shut it down.
Yeah.
You know, you never get to the, okay, I've called you about a pianist, but maybe you need a violist.
Right.
You know, and
Always.
guess what? I have a violist. I have a great violist for you.
Always.
So, but you don't, you know, unless you get into the conversation, you don't have that. And then over time, I think you try to come to trust one another, that you're not going to send anybody, you're going to try not to. I mean, this is pie in the sky, right? Because sometimes you just have to get engagements.
Yeah.
But the pie in the sky for me was always to make the right artist for the right organization, for the right orchestra, so everybody has a good time. You know, when I was on the road, sometimes I'd go and listen to what the audience was saying at intermission, just to see what the community was like, because that's your only crack at it,
Yes.
really. Not everybody does that, but for me, that was interesting. Are they talking about, you know, are they talking about the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, or are they talking about the dentist tomorrow? You know, it's interesting to see that sort of
It's
thing.
much more genuine. Speaking of relations, you have a relation with the artist. With YCA, what kind of relations have you had with the parents? Because sometimes
Relationships.
relationships with the parents. Thank you very much. I don't get.
Sorry, I didn't clear that up right away.
Dave never corrects me.
I'm sorry.
but
I'm sorry. That was an
do
important
need-
one. I would
yes.
never do it otherwise.
So parents,
Yes.
because your agency, YCA, may have
My old
a plan,
yeah.
a path for the artist for what they think is best. But did you have situations where maybe the parents were like, well, you kind of, you know, not doing what we think is best for our kid?
Not too much. Not too much. A little bit once in a while, but really it did not come up too often for me. But the artists were mostly ready to begin fully professional careers. There were a couple of younger ones.
Right. But Xian
That
was
where there
very
was a
young
li-
when
Xian was maybe 17 or so.
yeah, well, that's young.
No, yeah, it's young, but I mean, we had, you know, one artist who was 13. That was the youngest one that I know of. And there the parents were a little bit more involved, obviously, you know. But I never really ran into too much trouble with parents. I saw it backstage at another competition, but not at YCA.
I wasn't going to. Sorry, I
Yes.
wasn't going to ask this, but it's
Oh.
come up in questions. So
Uh-oh.
you know, it's not the sort of, we're not asking about specific names, and we're not talking about specific amounts or anything. Nothing too
I
direct
can't-
here.
yeah.
This is very general. Every musician comes to us with a rider.
Uh-huh.
What is the most bizarre or strange or unique thing that you have seen in a rider? I'll go first. No green M&Ms.
Uh-huh. You know, I never had, I'm sorry to
Really?
be disappointing, but I never had a weird rider. I
Okay,
really
all right.
didn't. I never saw a
Rider,
really freaky
R-I-D-E-R?
contract writer.
Yes.
Oh, a rider to a contract. It's sorry, you know that.
Yes, I've recently seen that we needed a 18-inch stool so that someone could get on a piano, and we also saw one recently with no green M&Ms backstage.
No,
So-
I didn't see any of those.
Oh, okay.
I didn't see any of those.
These might be more of the pops stars. we're
I
dealing
think
with.
that's probably that may be
But-
the case, or the rock and roll, or something.
Yes.
and the pops concerts that I did do were for people like Marvin Hamlish or
Yeah.
Arturo Sandoval, who I do. Oh God, he was great
Yeah.
too. So they were, they were very established and they were
Yes.
very
Yeah.
used to getting out. The writers, the things that I saw more had to do with accommodations.
Okay.
Just to make sure that there was going to be something to eat when the performance
course,
was over, because
yes.
sometimes this is something that comes up over and over again. I don't know if you've run into this, Iggy, but sometimes the concert is over late, and you're not always in a city like Honolulu.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're kind of out there. And then there's some sort of reception, but the artist is generally not munching. They're generally saying thank you very much, and I enjoyed being here. And then they get out of the hall at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and everything's shut down. There's nothing to eat. So I did see riders where sometimes they would ask for to make sure there was some food after the performance,
yes.
or that there was a restaurant. Somebody had spoken maybe to see if a restaurant could stay open late enough, or if there was 24-hour room service
Yes.
at the hotel.
Yeah.
It was more, the writers that I saw were more practical
yes,
things
practical. Yes.
Which
absolutely.
reminds me, so all artists love to kind of unwind and have good food. We had Midori a few times, and just a plug. Our friends with the Honolulu Chamber Music Series are going to present a concert with Midori. But Midori was here with the Hawaii Symphony, and we would have a Sunday concert at 4 p.m. and she would be flying later at night, maybe at 11 p.m. And unlike other artists who would just kind of have a supper, she would just stay in the dressing room and practice. After the concert, she would be playing Brahms' Violin Concerto.
Wow.
The concert would be over by 6 p.m. She'd say thank you to the audience, and then she would stay in the dressing room until 10 p.m. until it was time to go to the airport.
Oh my goodness.
It was quite
Wow.
amazing, such dedication. I think I would go crazy myself. But.
Wow.
We had someone ask if you could speak just a little bit more about your time with Miss Hilliard.
With Mrs. Hilliard?
Yeah.
Well, I did concert coordinating, which was interesting. It was I don't know what they'd like to know
Well,
about it.
what is her background? I mean, this
Oh,
is...
well, I can't really speak about
Okay.
Mrs. Hilliard. I mean, she's not in, I haven't seen her since,
Okay.
for a really long
Yeah.
time. I mean, longer in time.
Okay.
She was a musician.
She was.
I do know that. She was
Okay.
a musician. She's Japanese by birth, working in New York City.
Yeah.
But she started this wonderful management agency, and she managed a lot of great artists.
Yeah.
She was brilliant. She's a brilliant woman. Things were very exciting sometimes, and she's brilliant.
I'm sure.
She was really brilliant, and I learned a lot from her. Because in doing concert coordinating, I learned what things cost. You have at some point, if you're going to be in the business, you have to learn what it costs to put an orchestra on the road. And we toured a lot of orchestras. She did a lot of orchestral touring.
Really? Okay.
Yep. And so, I was doing temporary import bonds to get instruments into the country and make sure that they then went out. And I was doing buses and trucks and load-ins and load-outs and flyers and programs and photos and, all that stuff. So I learned a lot from Mrs. Hilliard.
Yeah.
I learned really a lot from Mrs. Hilliard. So,
So Cathy,
Yes.
We talked about New York, but you really have a true global perspective. You spent some time in France, as you mentioned. You touched on it very briefly. A lot of people who live outside of Hawaii and then they come and retire in Hawaii and they enjoy, everything that is beautiful about our islands. But you have a thirst for knowledge. You mentioned you had a degree in Pacific Island Studies.
I have a certificate.
A certificate.
I have a certificate from
and
UH
where
Hilo.
Did you already have that thirst for knowledge? And after your years in New York, what made you want to come to Hawaii and discover more about the history of?
Well, I've always been interested in other languages and cultures. Since I was a little girl, it's always been sort of bubbling there under the surface. And after a conference, I had been to a musical conference in Sydney, Australia, in 1994. And I'd always wanted to go to Tahiti. And so I stopped in Tahiti on the way home. It was in those days, you know, the cost of your airline ticket went down if you spent a week in Tahiti. And I was shocked at how little I knew, you know, about Polynesian music and dance and the language. I'd never heard a Polynesian language. I grew up in Connecticut, you know. I just hadn't been exposed to it in any way. So I started, once I went back to New York, I started, you know, reading. I was trying to read on my own and see what I could learn. And at some point I said, well, I haven't seen our Polynesia, and I really should go to Hawaii. And my parents had been here. My dad had spoken at a conference in Honolulu and in Maui in the 80s, and my mother loved it. And so I decided to come when I was taking that rest when I decided to stop work for a year or two. I came to Hawaii, and I spent a month. And
But you went to Honolulu or Hilo?
I went to Hilo. I came to Honolulu to visit, and then I said to a friend of mine, where else should I go? Because those were the days when you could still buy inter-island tickets, right? And somebody said, have you seen the volcano? And I went, ooh, the volcano. So then I went over to the Big Island. And meanwhile, I was learning more about Hawaii. I mean, he made sure I went to the Bishop Museum, and that I got to the Polynesian Cultural Center, and that I got to Iolani Palace, and you know that. And so I got more and more interested. But I realized, the more I was here, the more I realized how little I knew. So I really wanted to do something about that, and I wanted to delve into the Tahitian studies. I had a particular area of interest of ancient Tahitian society. So I had thought that I might get a master's degree, which I never was able to do. But I needed 18 credits in the field before I could apply for the master's degree, and I needed a language, and I had French, which worked for French Polynesia. So I went to UH Hilo, and I started in the summer. I took a Hawaiian language class, which I thought was just prudent because I couldn't pronounce anything, and I thought that was rude. So I had a great teacher. I still can't speak Hawaiian, but I loved learning part of the language and hearing about it. And then I went into the program, and I concentrated mostly on these Tahitian studies. But you learn, you know, some Pacific Island, global Pacific Island, in the sense that it's, you know, history and anthropology and art. You know, I had history of art. It was wonderful. I had a Polynesian music class, which I loved. It was great. Yeah, I love to learn.
I'm sure I have a lot to learn from you. But this is when you introduced me, or is that when Chion introduced me to you?
That's about when, well, I went to the Big Island, and then I hadn't seen Chion in about 10 years, and she and I worked together very well at Young Concert Artists. And I saw that she was going to perform with the symphony. So I flew in from Hilo for the concert, and I kind of surprised her, and it was really fun. It was just really fun. And so I may have met you backstage at that concert, because I've had the pleasure of knowing Joanne Folletta a little bit over the years too, and Joanne was conducting the concert, and I hadn't seen Joanne in a really long time. So that was fun for me. But then I saw you on the Big Island. I think the real introduction came on the Big Island through the festival, and I think it was the Four Seasons. Whether it was the Piazzolla Four Seasons or the Vivaldi Four Seasons, I'm not sure. But it was one of those. And that's when Chion really introduced us. And then,
it was wonderful. And Dave, as you saw, I mean, Cathy has so much knowledge and so many stories to share, and it's quite a treat that we have Cathy here on the islands.
I was very honored that you invited me this evening.
Well, we've left our most challenging question for the end here, and that is, you know, what's the future of classical music, symphonic music, and most specifically here in Hawaii and the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra?
Well, that's a hard question to answer at this moment in time, but I think that, well, classical music is going to stick around. I have no doubts about that. And I think that things will work out fine. They're lucky that you're here, and lucky that you were here, and the orchestra, it's a wonderful orchestra. So I see a good future. I really think it's a hopeful future. I do. About how things will change, I don't know, but of a continuation, I'm certain.
Good. Well, we look forward to talking about it next time you're on the show. Because we're going to keep this going for quite a while, right, Iggy?
There's been a lot of work, and I think Dave has done so much work behind the stage that no one can see or appreciate except for us, the musicians and the orchestra committee. It takes many, many different parts, the management, executive director, the staff, the board members, the musicians, the volunteers, the viewers like yourself. So
Yes.
we all are going in the same direction.
Yeah. We have a great staff at the Symphony and a wonderful board. A growing staff. We have a new personnel manager
right.
as of yesterday.
do?
Jamie Sanborn, our
Oh,
new personnel manager.
exciting.
Yes, it's great to have her on board. So, well, our hour is up. It just flies by, doesn't it?
I'm kind of shocked. But you've been wonderful. Thank you.
Oh,
As
no,
I said, it's
thank
been
you.
an honor
Yeah.
to
Good to have
be
you.
invited, and I'm delighted.
We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, we
And
will.
thanks to everybody who's watching.
Yeah. Well, we will see you next week.
Now.
Iggy, who is our guest next week?
We had Eldon Seta of the DOE a few weeks ago. Next week we will have Helen Chakisano and conductor Craig Young of the Punahou School. We'll visit a few of the private schools in the next few months. So
Well, and she gets a bottle of wine, so that works out well for the correct answer tonight. So we look forward to seeing you back here next Tuesday. Thank you so much for all of your support, and look forward to seeing you very soon. Cheers.
cheers.
Cheers.